Hello everyone. Thank you for joining our MHTTC MAPNET webinar today on a peer support model for cultural responsiveness when facing psychosis with Michelle West and Manny Hernandez. I'll be turning things over to them shortly, but first I'd like to review a few household keeping items with you all. Please remember to mute your computer speakers if you are calling in via phone. The computer speakers can be muted through Adobe Connect by pressing on the green horn above the presenter's pod. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing at a later time on the MHTTC website. The PowerPoint slides and any additional resources discussed today will be available later today as well. During the presentation, if you have any technical difficulties or questions about the topic, you can use the chat and questions box down on the bottom left. Those attending today's live event will also be able to reach us after the webinar. You can email newengland@mhttcnetwork.org. Our MHTTC's mission is to use evidence-based means to disseminate evidence-based practices across New England. Our area of focus is geared towards recovery through recovery-oriented practices and support services within the context of recovery-oriented systems of care. To ensure the responsiveness of our work, we will actively develop and maintain a network composed of different stakeholders from each of the 6 states to guide our activities. To learn more about us, you can visit our website as well. With that, it is my pleasure to announce our speakers today, Michelle West and Manny Hernandez.
Hi everybody, so I'm Manny Hernandez.
And I'm Michelle West.
I just want to thank everybody for taking time in your early morning to come and visit our webinar today. It's highly appreciated. Michelle and I worked on this for about 4 weeks now, and I hope you guys like it. So we'll start off with an overview of the training. So this content is based off the Young Adult Peer Mentor Practice Profile for Young Adults in Massachusetts, which is called the Core Elements Training. And then so this is where we get most of the content for this training. And then we're going to go into a little bit about defining culture. And we're going to present a video that one of my colleagues did around culture and what culture meant to her in her work. We're going to review and discuss bias and privilege and impact on clients, as well as go through a little discussion questions between Michelle and I to really get your guys thinking about self-exploration around some of these topics. We're also going to show you a progressive stacking chart, which I think is like this new and hip way to like sort of look at some of these issues and look at the underlying factors. And then lastly, we'll summarize the strategies of self-exploration in session and in-play scenario. And the scenarios is what we often do in our core elements training. So you guys will get to look at what that's like a little bit. So what is a peer mentor practice profile? So the practice profile was created in 2016. It was created by Mass Health, so the Medicaid service here in Massachusetts, the Department of Mental Health, which is the state agency for mental health services, young adult peer mentors, and supervisors of young adult peer mentors. And it was created with the purpose and intent of standardizing a model for young adult peer mentors, because there was young adult peer mentors in all types of service field, but there wasn't really like a standardized model for them to like really say this is what the work means, this is what the work entails, and this is how we do the practice. So it's a 3-day training. It's run by Kim Biscuit, myself, and some other young adult peer mentors in the field. And really there's a strong focus on lived experience, which is not the same compared to some clinical work. Mostly in clinical work, you're told that you shouldn't share what your challenges and your issues, but with this young adult peer mentor practice profile, it's really about the peer work, which means you share your lived experience with purpose and intent with the hope of inspiring hope. So these are the 6 core elements: practicing cultural responsiveness, which are going to be our focus for today. Building relationships, supporting young adult vision and goals, role modeling, promoting self-care, and demonstrating safe, ethical, and professional behavior. So we figured out that these were the 6 components of what it meant to be a young adult peer mentor. Before it was just 5, and then they've realized that they really needed something around self-care, because self-care is important, and self-care is important, I'm sure, to all of you guys that do your work, all of you folks, and it should be important to young adult peer mentors who maybe have a higher risk of, of falling into the cracks, so to speak. So in the training, like I said, we talk a little bit about storytelling. We read our comeback stories, which if people feel that they want to read it, they can read it to the class. And we talk about self-disclosure, and we use the Raptor tool. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's really a way to practice telling your story in a safe way that doesn't harm yourself or harm the people in the environment. And then we also talk a little bit about MI, motivational interviewing, with the purpose that some young adults don't really like to share a lot, and we want to get them to really come up and be open with us, and we want to provide a safe space that we can listen to them, understand them, and validate them. And we really think that is important to promoting young adult self-awareness. So what is culture? So most of us define cultures in very similar ways. We think about our skin tone, we think about our languages, we think about the type of foods that we eat, but culture is more than just that. Culture is like our experiences and how it shapes our worldview. Worldview is important because it's the lens that we see things through. And it's how we identify people, it's how we identify ourselves, it's how we identify our community members and our family members, the people at work. Then it's important to really look at culture in that way, because culture can really help provide access to a lot of resources, but it can also prevent you from obtaining a lot of things.
I can help with this.
So Michelle's going to help me with the video so that you guys can all see it.
Part of my work in identifying how to work with cultural responsiveness is involved when I was working with a 15-year-old girl who had many identity clashes in terms of being able to accept parts of herself that others said that weren't beautiful. And this included her cultural identity of being mixed race, and her mother was identified as white. And a lot of times she'll come to me and say, my mom says that my hair is ugly because it's not straight and blonde like hers. And I said, well, look at my hair. It's not straight and blonde, and I don't think it's ugly. So a lot of the times I worked on making sure that I created a safe space for her to be able to express herself, a safe space for her to be able to feel like it's okay to accept these parts of herself that others don't appreciate. And part of our work together really involved allowing her to express herself, allowing her to be who she is, and creating this safe space that she can really show me and show herself that she's capable of anything that she wants to do. And another part of her identity that she was kind of having a lot of clashes with was her sexual identity and also her gender identity. She came to me during one session, and she told me that she identified as pansexual, and she didn't tell anybody about this yet. So the first thing I did was like, all right, what is it? Tell me about it. I'm curious. I don't really know what that is. So we went to the library, and she's like, well, this is what it is, and I think this is what I am, and this is me. And part of it was just allowing her to just teach me, and being able to just sit back and just say, like, can you teach me about this? And that was really made her feel comfortable and made her feel like she had something valuable to share to the world. And another part of that is that she began to
She was able to express this to her mom, and they were able to work through it as well. And another part of our work was that she was really nervous about graduation, about what she should wear, how she should feel comfortable in her own performance. Is my mom going to be there? Is my mom going to not like what I wear? Like, she had all of these thoughts, and then all of it had to do with all the clashes that she was going through internally. And one thing that was really great and that made me really proud to see is that she walked across the stage with her big afro, and she loved it. She walked across that stage, and she was so happy, and her mom was there, and everybody just was so proud of her at that moment. And I was also just really glad to be able to be a part of that and to see how she was able to accept all of these parts of herself that she thought were ugly at first, but now she realized that these are beautiful and that she is able to accept all of those parts of herself.
So we showed that video to people who are learning about the training with the purpose of helping them figure out more what the training is all about. There's a video for each of the core elements, and you can find those on the CBH knowledge.center website. I think we're going to give a link to the video for you guys to have after the webinar. So this slide, we really wanted to focus on the fact that sometimes our staff doesn't really look like our young adults or our people that we serve, and there's reasons to that, obviously, and I'm not going to go into too many of those details, but we wanted to give people the opportunity to really think about self-exploration and figuring out, ways that they can be, progressive in their form of thinking. And in order to do that, Michelle has boldly volunteered to be sort of the person who asks questions to really get you guys thinking. And we hope that you guys can take some of these questions and ask yourself later on in your day or when you go back and reflect on this. So, Michelle, are you ready?
I am ready. I'll do my very best.
Cool. So, hi, Michelle. How are you doing today?
I'm anxious. How are you?
I think there's a little bit of that going around.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you some questions regarding culture. Is that all right?
That is okay. I will do my best.
Okay. So what is your gender, and what race do you identify with?
I'm cis female and super white.
Super white. Do you see power and privilege play out in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm the a common dynamic that you see in mental health practice where you have a white, super white clinician or therapist or doctor and working with a lot of young folks that are non-white. So just in that dynamic by itself, there's power by nature of our relationship as well as power due to our racial difference. And I'm cis female, so also I'm a majority gender as well. So I definitely see it play out in work here. And I also, I know you have another question related to kind of examples that I see. I've definitely seen a lot of examples of how privilege and power can play into our work situations. Like I've seen folks be called by the incorrect pronouns, like publicly in meetings. I've seen people kind of be asked questions to try to represent their people in ways that are unhelpful. And also, I really just think it's more the things that I don't see, though, because just because I am privileged, there's a lot that I'm not aware of and that I wouldn't even notice, because your background affects your lens of what types of details you catch and what language you use. I was thinking of one example in a seminar my colleague was leading and talking about, or asked the audience, when she says the word shrinkage, what we think of. And most of the white attendees in the seminar were remembering the Seinfeld episode where they were talking about male genitalia, and then we didn't even think of that shrinkage can also relate to hair. And so it affects just like even subtle things about your language use. There's a lot I'm sure I don't even notice or know about in how it plays out in work.
That's awesome. I mean, that was a great answer. I mean, I feel like you really think about this on your day-to-day.
Try to.
What are some things that you do to be self-aware about power and privilege as a white person in your community or in your work environment?
Yeah. I mean, I think that probably the first indicator for me is when I start to feel anxious or guilty or defensive. That's often an indicator that something's going on, and it could be other things as well, but I know that I grew up in a place where we had the privilege of not thinking about race and privilege, and so it's kind of the thing you didn't think about or talk about and you could avoid all the time. So my urge is definitely to avoid talking and thinking about race and privilege and difference. So I try to notice that and then act the opposite, so throw myself into situations that make me really uncomfortable, like this one.
Like this one.
Exactly. And then I try also to listen as well as to research things that I'm not aware of. And then kind of when I see, I try to appropriately support people when kind of they want me to advocate for them. And that's always a little complicated, but I try to do those things, and I am confident that I have failed on multiple occasions to act appropriately, but I try.
Thank you. I really appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your vulnerability and how willing you were to talk about that. I think that we need a lot more of that if we're going to move forward, and I really appreciate everything you said.
Thank you. And thank you for presenting.
Thank you. We really wanted to give you guys an opportunity to think about some of these questions as it relates to culture, as it relates to gender and to race. And because whenever people talk about race, it's like, I think Michelle pointed out, sometimes there's a tendency to want to avoid it, but we really want to, push past those boundaries and really feel vulnerable and open. So this next slide here it's called progressive stacking. It's a progressive stacking chart, and basically what it is a way to identify sort of prejudice and who are the people who are oppressed in certain situations, why are they oppressed, what is their privilege, and where does it sort of stack up next to other people. So I thought this was interesting because I really want people to really self-explore and be aware of some of the bias and some of the potential areas of power and privilege that arise. So you can look at this and think, where do I fit? Where do other people fit in this? And so the point of this is really to redistribute power. And so how would you do that per se? So for example, if I notice that there's a black female in the room and she has something that she wants to say, I will give her an opportunity to speak. And if I'm leading the discussion, more so than perhaps maybe a white male. And why? Because traditionally blacks and women have been marginalized. And then so you try to redistribute the power back to the people that normally don't have a lot of say, normally don't have a lot of voice. So strategies to consider for culture. Do your research. I think one of the things that I like about this webinar is that Michelle was so open to volunteer and talk about some of the challenges around being a white woman and related to culture and how we can't be so close-minded. So do your research. It shouldn't be sometimes it gets old and repetitive, being like, for example, the only black man in the room that's always talking about race. That you get really tired. So really do your research and figure out, what is this person's culture, what is this person's background, what do they relate to, what do they identify with. And listening is so important. Just making sure that you're validating people and what they have to say, and being empathetic. Being empathetic. There's a Brene Brown video on sympathy versus empathy, which you guys should totally check out if you haven't already. And it really gets down to the critical components of what it means to be empathetic, and it's this idea of like taking someone else's sort of experience and somehow feeling that out, and it means what it means to them. There's one of my colleagues, Rochelle Ramos. She has this great quote. I don't know where she came up with it, but she says, "I may not have been in the same shoes, but I've been in the shoe store." And it gets to this idea of like, you may not know exactly what people are going through, but as a peer in the work, or maybe just we all have different reasons that we get into this line of work. Maybe in your own experiences, you might not know exactly what somebody's going through, but you have a sense of it, and you can sort of take from your previous experiences to really get down to what it is that they're feeling. So giving people the opportunity to have a safe space is very important. And I say that because sometimes people, there's a story of a young person who recently started dating, and they went to their clinician and was like to their clinician, I have found someone, and this is amazing. And this was a young male, and the clinician says, "Oh, what's her name?" And the young male was, he was an African American man, and he was seeing another man, and he was so embarrassed that he never went to that therapist ever again. So just like tiny assumptions like that sometimes can really, and I'm guilty of it myself. It happens to me all the time, being a cisgendered man, and then so tiny things like that sometimes can really prevent you from moving forward in the conversation. So being non-judgmental and providing an opportunity for self-expression, regardless of what it is that they want to talk about, just being willing to go there with them. And I found that works well with young adults because that's sort of my realm, young adults. That works well with them because sometimes it's not so much what the challenge is or what their goal is. It's just really like how can I make it through today so that tomorrow I can work on my goals, so going there with them is really important. So this slide, Michelle personally asked me to put this slide in because she thought it was very important, and I think it's important too for the work that everyone does that's here. So an important thing to remember is that the peer is like a new role. So in many situations, it's happened before, and I hear this all the time, that they're not welcome into the work environment. They're not welcome into the community because they're like, "Oh, you're a peer. What do you know? You just have fun with them." And that's been the case for many young adult peer mentors who have heard that, like, "Oh, you're just there to have fun with them," and that's not it at all. You're there to like share your hope and share your wisdom and encourage them to do better. And because the young adult peer mentor has been, through systems, they can really help them navigate that situation and navigate what that feels like. We had a gift training back with Department of Youth Services here in Massachusetts a while back, and one of my colleagues, Eddie, and I say his name, I don't think he minds, Eddie really was able to resonate with some of the young adults because of his lived experience, because of his background, because he's been there and he knows what that's like. He was able to share some of the truths that he's learned, and the young adults really like resonated with that, and they really, one of them wrote a rap for their comeback story, and it was really nice to see them, because when we went in the first day, they're like, oh, who are these people? Like, we don't want to talk to you guys. But as we got to open up and they got to learn more about us and we got to learn more about them, they realized that, that we're not all that different. And they really started to listen to us. So next, we're going to do a role play. And the role play is something that we do in the core elements training. We have a role play for every core element, but this one was tailored uniquely to the first episode Psychosis programs. So we hope that you guys like it. So it'll be the first time we're going live. So there's 3 methods of grading. So there's ideal, which means that there was demonstrated a great ideal of like thoughtfulness and preparedness, and the person really listen to what the other had to say. And we go through this grading system because there's 3 grading systems in the training for each one. But today we'll just be doing one due to time. And then there's developmental, which is like I'm sort of getting there, but I'm not quite there. And then sufficient, which is like I totally just was unaware of, cultural background and story. So key things to consider, just figure out, is it ideal, developmental, or insufficient? And so next slide this is the case example, and Michelle, do you mind reading?
I will. This young person is a 15-year-old biracial Puerto Rican and Haitian female. She's an only child and lives with both parents. She recently started her sophomore year of high school with school supports or an IEP in place since last year. Over the past year, she's developed increased disorganized speech, becoming word salad at times per her school's report, unclear thoughts about random numbers having meaning for her, and suspiciousness. Her family has been hesitant about seeking mental health treatment. However, about 5 months ago, she became more irritable, disoriented, and aggressive towards her family. So her parents took her to the ER and she was hospitalized. While there, she was started on an antipsychotic, her first time taking medication, no known history of substance use, trauma, or other medical concerns. Her father's brother or her paternal uncle had a psychotic disorder, and the client and her family have been ambivalent about outpatient treatment with variable attendance at appointments.
So next, Michelle and I are going to act out a little role play. I'm going to be Jamie, and Michelle's going to be Aniela, who's the young adult that we're serving. So I am the young adult peer mentor. Hi, Aniela. How's it going?
Not very good. I've started taking medication that I don't want to be on because they give weird side effects.
Sorry to hear that. Why did you start taking medication?
It was during my hospitalization. They said the meds would help me feel better.
And do they?
Yes and no. I feel like they're making me sluggish.
What does your family think?
They don't approve of the medication. They say they don't want me to become addicted.
Is that how you feel?
No, I just don't like them, and I'd like to stop them.
You must feel awful. And though I don't know exactly how you feel, but being a peer, I have found my fair share of issues with meds. The best lesson I've learned is that it's important to be a good self-advocate for yourself, and I can help you when talking to your prescriber. In the case of deciding to stop meds, it's really important to weigh out the pros and cons.
The pros and cons?
Yeah. If you'd like, I can create a list of pros and cons to being on medications to see if they're right for you. If not, we can look at alternative methods to treatment.
There are alternatives? No one's ever told me that.
Yeah, there are plenty of books and articles for people who experience what you're experiencing with information on diets you can try exercise tips for a healthy brain.
And we do a pros and cons.
Sure. I'll go get some paper. So that was a scenario that we created sort of to represent sort of some of the interactions that goes on. And it's like a role play, but it's really like a real play because some of these stories actually happen. And we want to like really be responsive to when they happen. So you guys can decide for your own if that was ideal, developmental, or sufficient. But like sometimes things happen where like the person doesn't want to be on meds, and the person working with them is really like, no, you really have to be on meds. And it's not our job to tell people what to do. A therapist should never be telling anyone what to do, or else that's not really looked at as ethical. We want to, unless it's something that really prohibits somebody from being safe. In that case, it's different. But we really want to try to minimize risks and danger.
Do you mind if I ask you a question or a couple questions about the role play?
Sure.
I know one of the things that we talked about is that this is a really common exchange that happens related to medications.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, in your experience as a peer mentor, how do teams respond to your involvement in talking to young people about medications?
So one thing as a peer, we never want to share what meds we're on because that can lead to a whole other conversation. Like we had a core elements training last week that somebody talked about Tylenol, and everyone was like, oh, Tylenol this, Tylenol that. Tylenol, because people have so many opinions around medication that it's never good to really mention what meds you're on. And then so I guess my experience, sometimes parents don't want the kids on the meds, some similar to this scenario.
Yeah.
And then it's like really talking to the parents to figure out, what works best for the young adult. Sometimes parents really want the kids on the medication. The kids don't want to be on the medication, so then it's talking to the young adult what works best for them.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong answer. It's just whatever. There's no one size fits all. It's just figuring out, what is the best method for this person. And then I think in my role as a peer, the most support that I can do is going with somebody to that meeting with the prescriber, because sometimes, the prescriber has 15 minutes to talk with this person, and they're in and out the door.
Yeah.
So really saying, but this is what I need, this is what my side effects, this is what's happening, and really getting down to the critical points of that. I myself am a person that takes prescription medication, and I've learned that, unless you really say what's going on for you, you don't really get, the right care.
Yeah.
And if whatever reason, if that doctor doesn't work out, you can try another one.
Yeah.
So that's the advice I give to people.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was so curious with with this is a great example, and also, and this came up when you were preparing for this, I know, that in a lot of first episode teams, there's a lot of really strong opinions on meds, just among, you were saying among anyone. When you've joined young folks with their prescribers, I don't even know my question. Is that awkward? How have prescriber, the psychiatrist or the team member, responded to your presence? Does that ever lead to tension? How do you navigate that aspect of the situation?
I think there's a little tension. Luckily, I've never been on I've never been in a meeting where the psychiatrist is the same person on my team. But I think if there is any tension and the person is on my team, I try to talk to them beforehand and let them know, hey, I'm thinking about coming to so-and-so's meeting next Wednesday, and maybe lay out these are some of the things that they've wanted to talk about, so that they're not caught off guard.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good way to prepare them to kind of decrease defensiveness. It's let them work through some of their reactions beforehand.
Yeah. And then if the young adult doesn't want me to go to the meeting, maybe I'll just role play with them. How are you going to talk to your prescriber, and I'll be the prescriber, and they can be themselves. Yeah. And we'll role play how to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Super interesting. So Sorry, I totally derailed you because I had some follow-up questions.
No, it was great. Those were great questions.
I was also curious if any other folks might have had some questions. I also, do you have more stuff, or do you want to do questions now?
I think questions.
Yeah, I think that one. You could read that out.
So the question is, can you say more about how or whether you get into supporting a young person to be aware of their rights, including informed consent and refusal of medications and other treatments? So I guess to inform someone of their rights, you have to know the rights first. So I would prepare myself to be well informed first, and then after that, I'd sort of like let them know. I think young adults are smart, so they know when you're saying something to them, they kind of get it for the most part. And if not, you can break it down to them in a way that they do understand it. And then also, like, if you tell themselves, make sure you tell their parents if they're under 18, because if they can't, if they're not in a position to take care of themselves, maybe their parents will be.
That's a great question. I had like a scenario, not quite scenario as it is up here, but something that's come up for me a couple times in working on First Episode team and some other teams. I've gotten asked before about whether we could give medication to a young person, like the parent asked, can we give this medication and not tell them what it is or what it's for? I'm curious if you have any thoughts about, I have some very strong thoughts about that, but it's actually come up a few times where a parent has asked us to give a medication without telling the young person or telling them it's a different medication than what it is. Has that ever come up for you in any of your work before?
It has, but with very little children, where the parents sort of have more autonomy over them. Yeah.
How little? Like 12?
Like 10.
10, okay.
Like 10. Oh. So I'm not sure how to answer that. How it sounds like you guys obviously found some type of solution.
Well, I don't know. I think that we really support informed consent, and often we try to understand all perspectives in that sort of situation. So my automatic reaction to that is like, no, of course we can't do that. But a lot of times parents are asking us that from a place of desperation, where they really are seeing a change in their kid, and they really want them to feel better, and the young person is not really interested in taking medications. And so, I was just curious if you had thoughts on that. It's like giving somebody a medication without telling them what it is, like that would not be an ethical behavior for us. And, it does come from desperation a lot of the time. Would certainly not feel very good to be on the receiving end of that, to be given a medication by your parent or by your doctor without being told what it was. Yeah. I think we have other questions popping up.
So the next question, is there a standard to give people rights information?
That's a good question.
How would you answer that, Michelle?
How would I answer that? Is there a standard? I think that part of, so I'm not a psychiatrist. I do my best to give folks information and talk about pros and cons, kind of like what you're saying in the role play, pros and cons of medication, but I'm never the one taking the lead in offering kind of prescription medications. Talking about the risks and benefits is definitely something that should be done in those conversations. So side effects and risks, and that medications are a choice. Unless you are, like, the only exception to that is there's a treatment over objections order you can get, like if you're in the hospital and there's a risk of injury to yourself, but that's the exception. And on outpatient, we can't force people to take medication over their objection. I don't know how often, I've definitely seen conversations occur without all aspects of that happen. I don't know for you how much you've kind of observed any of this. Like, how often do people explain the rights that they have related to meds in those conversations?
Not very often.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not often that people are getting explained. Normally they're being prescribed stuff that they start going to a hospital. I mean, they get hospitalized, they get put on meds during their hospitalization, and then they get into outpatient, and they just continue to give it to them.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that was kind of the case for this scenario. That's a common situation, is you start a medication on inpatient, and you're kind of told that in order to get out of the hospital, you're going to have to start taking this medication. So it doesn't seem like a clear situation where your rights are explained. It's like, oh, you could refuse it, but you're going to stay here longer if you do, sort of thing. Yeah, that makes sense.
So next question. How do you balance tension of families' beliefs that may not support clinical interventions with youth, young adults, and persons' needs?
Yeah. I guess maybe as a kind of like a adjusted version of that, like what are some ways that you've seen culture and background impact people's interest in taking medication or their hesitation?
Well, for example, I'm Dominican, and I know a family that's also Dominican, that when sort of the problem started to rise around psychosis, they didn't think, it was like a mental health concern. They thought it was like this person was possessed by demons. So that's a common commonality amongst a lot of families. So how do you kind of address that and kind of help the person understand? And I think it's being open and vulnerable, and at the same time being willing to share, a little bit about what you know. And then also being willing to hear back what they have to share. With this family, luckily they were able to get the young adult on medication, and they've been on medication, and they're doing great on medication, and that's what worked for them. But that might not be the case for everybody. So how do you minimize risk and danger? Yeah.
Have you ever encountered a family where the young person really wants to be on the medication and has found it helpful, and the family has been really hesitant or concerned about taking medication for kind of cultural beliefs?
No, it's never been.
It's usually been like the folks in the family would be on the same page about.
Yeah. Yes or no.
Yeah.
How about you?
I've a little bit, actually. I did have one. I worked with one young person where the family was really afraid of the medications, and we found, I think it was partially our fault that we didn't, like, in my background, like, there's my immediate family, and then we don't really talk to anyone else outside of it. We're pretty, like, on an island in terms of my immediate family. But for this family, like, they had a whole network. I think there were, mom was from Puerto Rico, and so they had a lot of contact with mom's family. And we found out much later, because I didn't think of this, that the mom was getting a lot of pressure from extended family members that the medications were bad, and that the kid shouldn't be on medications, and that he doesn't have this struggle that he was having. So mom was experiencing a lot of pressure, and then was taking the young person off of his medication, and the young person really wanted to be on it, and got really pissed off at mom, because he was very afraid when his psychotic symptoms got higher. Like, he thought people were going to kill him. And so that was kind of like, and we didn't really, like, think to look at the broader family network until, like, months after we started working together. But that was definitely a really big piece, is, like, looking at the broader system and kind of who different parts of the family, like, what their beliefs might be. And that was really helpful to learn that the broader family unit can be really important in that respect. I'm so blind I can't see any of these.
The next question is, what ideas do you have about language to describe psychosis or spiritual emergence to varying cultural backgrounds, beliefs, and systems?
That's a good question. Any thoughts come to mind?
Can't think of anything on the spot. It's a great question.
I think I've definitely heard folks talk about psychosis spectrum experiences in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's there are networks like the Hearing Voices Network. There are folks that kind of see like hearing and seeing things as being part of their spiritual practice, and that in the medical community we see psychosis as being potentially an illness or could be, and not everyone sees it that way. So I think it'd be really helpful to ask first how the person is interpreting their experience and how their family is, and other important people in their life, and then kind of with that in mind, be kind of asking whether they want to know more about the like medical interpretation of psychosis. Not everyone is like super wants to hear about that, but for folks that do, seeing it more as like this is another way of interpreting these experiences, and it's really for you to think about how you want to interpret your experience for yourself, kind of based on what's important to you, based on your beliefs and values. I don't think there's any one way of doing it. And starting out by asking the person like what their understanding of the experiences are is whatever is a good start. I don't know if you've had any other ways that that's come up in your experience. Different
I think you mentioned some of them, like the Hearing Voices Network, and sort of like really focusing on the experience, not so much the diagnosis.
Yep.
You know, what it is that I'm experiencing versus, versus medical terminology.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely known some folks who have, like, that they might hear and or see things and kind of describe these as spirits, and people in my family see and hear spirits, and really appreciating that experience. I'd say that by itself, like, that's not a diagnosis. Like, if it's something that is not causing you distress or interfering with things that you want to do in your life, and it's a, like, shared experience in your family or your group, it's not necessarily, problematic or something that requires a label, or at least a medical label. Any other questions that people have, or any other things we were supposed to talk about? Started diving into discussion. Awesome. I thought we were probably pretty close to a question time period.
So the next question, how do you support a young adult with advocating to put in a PRTF because they feel they are breaking down and know that is a feeling like no other? Do you help by finding those resources, or do you encourage them to have an intense conversation with their family for this form of treatment?
I don't actually know what PRTF stands for. Do you know what that stands for? No. Okay. Within a PRTF. Oh, it could be. Maybe. I mean, I think that both types of interventions sound potentially helpful. That kind of without being able to Google what a PRTF is.
So it stands for Psychiatric Residential Treatment Facility.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Probably every state has a different abbreviation for these sorts of things. So I think that when somebody is starting to struggle, that like having conversation with the young person and relevant people in their life, so usually that includes family, about like what everyone is noticing is becoming more difficult and what options exist. So that might be like coming into treatment more often, that might be different things a young person or family can do, and that might be higher level of care, like a residential. And so optimally you want to be talking about those options for a while, like outside of an acute crisis, so that you're able to think through the pros and cons, and everyone can weigh in with what they like about that idea, what they don't like about that idea. And I think that's really helpful. And sometimes those are pretty intense discussions, usually Most people don't like the idea of going to a residential, really understandably, so there's some notable cons in the con list for that. And then sometimes folks will decide that right now that's the best fit for what they need. Yeah, there's kind of probably no one answer to that, but I do think like collaboratively discussing together with all relevant people is the best approach for any sort of treatment decision like that. It's like a big deal. Yeah. Like you're leaving your home, like you're going and living in some random building with a bunch of strangers and having a lot of your like freedoms taken away if you go and live in a residential. So it is a big decision. Let's see. Our screen just changed, so we got disoriented. Any other? I'm trying to think if there are any other questions. I guess, were there any other things related to our discussion earlier about like privilege or bias that you thought would be helpful to like mention as examples that we didn't talk about? Like ways that you've seen this play out in the work environments where you've been?
I think it's really hiring staff that are reflective of the community. Mm-hmm. I think that's a huge first step. And like there's this person who works in a hospital, and one thing that they've said before is that they want to be the only white person in the room. So I think that's important because, traditionally we have the people who are at the bottom of the service provider network and who are people of color. And then as you go higher up the ranks, you start to get more white and more men. Mm-hmm. So how do you sort of like flip that on its head?
Yeah. So do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, that's an issue. You see that all over the place. Is very white dominant clinics and programs.
Yeah, I mean, I think in order, for equity, in order to have any real change, someone has to give up power. It's like that. Have you guys seen that picture of the fence and there's three people and trying to look at the fence and there's like blocks under them to try to help them look at the fence? So somebody has to give up their block in order for someone else to be able to see. And I think that's scary for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. Did another question pop up?
Do you know of any effective trainings on LGBTQ values?
That's a good one. Effective trainings. I know there have been some that MHTTC and MAPNET have done some trainings via webinar, but I think I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head, but here in the Massachusetts, I don't know where this person lives, but here in the Massachusetts area, there's Fenway Health does a lot of trainings, and there are some folks that we've had come and do talks with us as well that have been really helpful. So maybe we can put a link to that on the website once we're done with the webinar today. Yeah, we have I have a list of resources, so maybe we can put a list of resources on there. Yeah. Were there any others on there? It was at the end of. Okay, cool. Awesome. Any other questions that we can help answer before we end for today?
Does the clinician have a responsibility to advocate for medication treatment in client population that are impacted by stigma?
I would say yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that part of our responsibility as clinicians is to give people information about, at people's request. So, not lecturing at people when they don't want us to be, but on medication and treatment options, as well as on stigma that exists in society. So especially for mental health difficulties, especially for psychosis, there is a lot of stigma in society. So bringing that up spontaneously as part of your information to folks, that that psychosis is a word that's used in the media, that it's used in society. There's a lot of misinformation about it and about what it means. So giving information about that, as well as challenging the myths that people hold about what psychosis means for you in your life. So challenging beliefs that psychosis experiences mean that you can't work, or that you can't get married, or that it kind of like leads you to have a certain type of life or behave in a certain way.
Yeah, I can openly say that I'm a person that experiences psychosis. I've been diagnosed with several different diagnoses throughout my life, like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar with psychotic symptoms, back to schizoaffective disorder. I'm wondering if the next time I get hospitalized it'll be schizophrenia again. But like I work, I work full time at the Department of Mental Health. I have a wife, I live in a home, so it is very possible.
Yeah, and that's why, I love the role of peer mentors on a team, because you can be just a very visible, like, human in real life example that the stereotypes that people hear and the stigma that people hear are not true, and it really helps. Like you were describing hope earlier in the webinar, it really helps to encourage hope for folks that are really afraid about what the changes in their experiences mean for them. It's super important. Let's see. So we're probably just about out of time. I don't know if the webinar hosts have any other comments that they need to make before we end for today. I'm giving them a pause to see.
Yep. So thank you, everyone. So you'll be receiving an evaluation form for this webinar right afterwards. In addition, we have a few upcoming events, and please feel free to register if you are interested. And again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And somebody just asked a question that I'll respond to, but if this person can contact me, we'll let Manny ponder that request. And then if he says yes, I can connect you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we hang up now?